The candidates for the United States Senate next on this week's edition of The State We're In.
The State We're In is brought to you by the members of WGBY and by...
Hello, my name is Russell Denver, and I'm president of the Affiliated Chambers of Commerce of Greater Springfield. We're pleased to be able to partner with WGBY to bring important programming about economic and community development to the Pioneer Valley.
Hello, welcome to a special edition of The State We're In. I'm Jim Madigan. With us, the three candidates for the January 19th special election for the United States Senate. They are Republican candidate, State Senator Scott Brown, Democratic candidate, Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley, and independent candidate Joseph L. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy is a vice president for information technology for a major corporation in Boston. He is a libertarian, but he is running as an independent. This will not be a formal debate in the usual sense you might think of it. No real strict time limits for the candidates' responses, comments, rebuttals. We're really hoping for kind of a good discussion here of the issues that I will raise through the next hour. At the end, we will allow each candidate 2 minutes to sum up their case in a closing statement. Now, we literally drew names out of an old cigar box we found to determine the order the candidates will respond both at the end and the closing statements. And first now to the questions I'll pose. As it turns out, Mr. Kennedy will get to speak first on the first question. First, let me say to all of you, thank you very much for coming and spending some time with us. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Our pleasure. National unemployment numbers new out this Friday. Unemployment holds at 10%, but we're told there's a net loss of about 85,000 jobs nationwide. I'm going to ask you for your interpretation on this. Does it mean, since we're holding at the same number as we were a month ago, that things are starting to stabilize, level off, the economy is improving, the stimulus is working, or do you see us stalled? And if so, what should we do that we're not doing? What should we be doing differently? Mr. Kennedy.
Well, I think not only are we stalled, but if you take a look at that same report, interesting numbers that came out in that report stated that more and more people had given up looking for work. And that is one of the worst things that you can see in an economy, when people actually start to say, hey, not only am I going to stop, having faith in the future, but I'm going to stop looking for a job. And those numbers aren't reported in that number, that 10% number that you're talking about. So not only are we stalled, but things are getting worse. And the reason why they're getting worse is because we haven't started doing what we need to do to put the economy back rolling again, which is cut spending dramatically. Right now, all we're doing is we're taking money from the private sector via taxes, and we're giving it to the public sector via bailouts and stimulus plans, and that doesn't work. All that is doing is mixing the pie, and you're not going to create new jobs in the private sector, which is what is needed to stimulate the economy, by doing that type of economic movement of money.
Very good. Ms. Coakley, your reaction to today's numbers?
Well, a little over a year ago, we were on the edge of what would have been the worst disaster since the Great Depression, probably is still, although we made efforts to try and turn the economy around, mitigate that damage based upon economic policies from the past administration that caused this failure. And as we've gone through this, people said at the time, it is going to be a tough haul coming out of this. Let's stop where we're going, let's mitigate the damage, and let's see what we can do in the next 15 months. In some ways, the news could be worse. And I agree that people's expectation was that it might go down. The fact that it's holding says a couple of things, and you can look at the glass half full or half empty, but it says we still have a lot more work to do. And to make sure that we are able to get the economy moving again, we do need to look at how we are going to do that with getting credit moving again to small businesses, to make sure that we have a tax policy that takes the squeeze off the middle class and gets folks working and trained. And we are starting to do that. We can do that. Luckily, our numbers are a little lower in Massachusetts, so we can lead the way on that. But I think we still have a lot of work to do.
Mr. Brown.
Well, Jim, thanks for that question. We're 85,000 jobs is not holding the line. We've lost 85,000 more jobs, and this is a race about differences, and we're in a very tough economic situation, as you know, and there's plenty of blame to go around. This is a race between Martha Coakley and me, and you're talking about somebody who wants to lower taxes and lower spending versus somebody who's pushing for $2.1 trillion of extra taxes, is in favor of a second stimulus bill, and we can afford it right now. We're in a time where people need more money in their pockets. And I've called for a JFK-style across-the-board tax cut, including a reduction in payroll taxes, to make sure we put more money in people's pockets to create jobs and stimulate the economy. That's the thing we need to do right now. We can't put more and more regulation on businesses and expect them to come out and want to hire and expand. For example, we have the health care proposal, which is not good for Massachusetts. It's going to cost Massachusetts jobs. We've got the cap-and-trade scheme, which is going to put businesses out of business. I was at Polar Beverages out in Worcester. I was out here in Holyoke and Springfield, and you're talking extra money in a time when people can't afford it. So this is a race about differences, and I'm ready to go down there and hold the line on spending, reduce taxes, and try to find a different answer, because this one isn't working.
I'm going to carry this discussion on a little bit because I bet, Ms. Coakley, you'd probably like to respond to some of what was said there. We'll go
Sure. Well, my question, Scott, would be then, did you not agree with the TARP and this first stimulus? And if you didn't, are you willing to send that money back that your district got in the first stimulus back to Washington?
Well, thank you. No, I did not agree with the first stimulus because it hasn't created one new job. And as you know, as Attorney General, because you are supposed to help oversee the money, we're 49th out of 50 in actually releasing the money. It's still up in the State House. So that money hasn't actually worked and hasn't gotten out and doing those shovel-ready projects. For example, if we want to use the money now, what I would do is I would recall that money and actually use it to rebuild the infrastructure so we have long-lasting effects and actually create jobs. The TARP had a certain benefit to it. I would have targeted a little bit more and not just a no-strings-attached situation, and I would have allowed certainly to help, but not pay out the huge bonuses that that banks and others were getting. But, you know, I'm glad you brought that up because there are so many differences between you and me when it comes to taxation, when it comes to spending. One of your, recently in the debate you did, you said that in order to get out of this deficit, we need taxes to go up. I disagree. I think we need taxes to go down.
If I can, Jim,
Please.
that's inaccurate,
Please.
and you know that that's taken out of context. In that time, what I talked about was the need to get people back to work so tax revenues could go up. I misspoke, but it's clear in the context what I meant. So you are saying you'd take the money that your district got in Massachusetts for stimulus money and send it back to Washington?
No, that's not what I said at all. I
Well,
said
then you agree with the first stimulus.
We capture the money that hasn't been released. We're 49th out of 50, Martha. As you know, we have not released that money.
Except that that will be released and it's planned to be.
The money in my
and we
district.
held the line in Massachusetts on that.
Held the line in what?
On losing jobs. We kept jobs in cities and towns, with police, with fire, with teachers as a result of that. And that was also what that first stimulus was about. It was preventing losing jobs.
No, it was to create jobs and get shovel-ready projects. The governor, as you know, asked every community for shovel-ready projects. The only money that's gone out is to backfill municipal budgets. When it goes right down to actually creating jobs in Massachusetts, it hasn't worked. I wouldn't support another stimulus. You would.
I didn't say that. I've never said I would. I said we'd like to see what the first one works, and the first one worked to prevent the loss of jobs, and it was, as the President said, to prevent losing jobs and to grow jobs.
We've still lost many jobs in Massachusetts, so it hasn't worked. It hasn't created one job.
I want to give Mr. Kennedy a chance to say something further.
I find the conversation amusing because I'm a student of history, and we need to look at history if we want to get ourselves out of this. The reality is very, very simple. Every single dollar of tax revenue that comes from any individual in the state of Massachusetts that goes up to the federal government, only 80 cents comes back, and that includes the bailouts recently, that includes historically over time. So we are losers as a state. Now, if we lived in New Mexico, for every dollar that went up, $2.05 would come back to the state. So the fact that we're arguing about who gets a bailout and who doesn't get a bailout, it's kind of amusing to me because the reality is we are a state that loses money every single time an individual pays a dollar in federal income tax. If we want to get the government started again, and we want to get people spending again, we need to actually stop paying taxes at the level that we are today. And to do that, we need to cut spending first, because you can't continue to cut taxes if you're not willing to cut spending. And then we need to get government out of the way of businesses so businesses can start again. And
Jim,
I
if
was
I can just quickly respond
please.
to that, because I'm a
Absolutely.
student of history too, and I've talked to a lot of folks in the financial area, many of whom agree that we didn't have enough regulation on Wall Street, that Washington didn't do its job, and that this particular crisis, with all of these predatory lending, securitization of loans, we're without a playbook. We were without a playbook last year, and most people agree that without some kind of bailout, whether, and I think it should have had strings attached clearly, but without some kind of bailout, and the need to get stimulus money out there, we would have been in a depression worse than the Great Depression.
So very, very quickly, I'm sorry, Scott. I think what's important here is there is a playbook. You need to look at history, and you had to look at what President Harding did during the early 20s. He dealt with a recession that was more dramatic than what we have today, that was more dramatic than the Great Depression, and he pulled us out as a country, and he did it in a year. So look at what he did. He cut spending.
Well, except you also know what followed that, and we can...
Right. I do know what followed that, but he delayed it for 8 years.
Mr. Brown wants to...
Just had a quick question. We're in a situation right now where we have a beer tax, meals tax, sales tax, hotel tax. We're looking at, we just did a sales tax. We have so many taxes here in Massachusetts. We've gone from almost a $3 billion structural surplus to almost being broke. We've had 3 speakers being indicted. We have 3 senators resigning in disgrace. There's a lack of trust on Beacon Hill. There's also a lack of trust in Washington by the backroom deals with the health care proposal, with the proposal on cap and trade, with the potential war tax, with the expiring tax cuts, the marriage penalties coming back, the dividends that you pay, those are going to be taxed higher. And these are where the differences are. This is where people need to do their research, and they need to look at who is going down to Washington to do what. Now, I've been proposing, for example, the expiring tax cuts. Those are tax cuts that Martha wants to expire. She wants the marriage penalty to come back. She's also in favor of the capital gains rising, because those are the things that naturally will happen. And if you take the entire package of the items that she's talked about during her debates and thereafter, $2.1 trillion of additional taxation pursuant to the Congressional Budget Office, nothing that we've been out for quite a while. No one's really refuted them. And I can do better. We can go down there and hold the line. We can go back to the drawing board on the health care bill as the 41st Senator. I can tell them to do better and try again and get it, something like we have here in Massachusetts.
Very specific named criticisms there. I know you want to mention.
And Scott said this time and time again, and I say the same thing because he's wrong, and he pulls numbers out of nowhere that he can't support. And what Scott is saying is that he supports the status quo. Let's maintain what we have. Let's pretend that we don't have an economic recession, that we don't need health care reform, that we don't have a climate change issue, and everything will right itself. And he ignores completely how we got where we are. I know that because I've been working as Attorney General very efficiently, I might say, as a fiscally responsible steward of that office, bringing back $5 for every dollar I get in tax dollars, bringing back over $1 billion to the Commonwealth and people in the Commonwealth for fraud, for abuse, from predatory lenders, from Wall Street. And so we need to address those issues. I agree with that. And I agree that we need to give relief to the middle class. And the only tax I've talked about is that we have supported the most wealthy in the country who got a benefit from the Bush tax increase, and that increase of the top 2% of the country is one that should expire. But I said specifically and time again that I think that the middle class is being squeezed, that we need a health care and a tax policy that will help us get there. And to say that the status quo is what, so that's really what you're saying. The status quo is okay, I don't want to change anything.
Well, if I could just take a moment.
Real briefly, and then we will move on.
Well, all due respect, there's no one, I think, in your listening audience that thinks Martha is a tax cutter. Since I've been on in the State House, I've never voted for a tax increase while in elective office. I've continuously fought for the small businesses in this area. And to say that I'm in the status quo, I think, is disingenuous at best, because the proposals that you're talking about, these are things that you said during the debates. So they didn't come out of left field. We're not making them up. And to just target the middle-class tax cuts, everybody needs a tax cut, a JFK across-the-board tax cut to stimulate jobs and create business revenue that will come back into the kitty and ultimately lift up the economy. And we have very clear differences as to how to get to do that, to support a cap and trade.
I don't mind discussing the differences, but I just want to be accurate. You're entitled to your opinion and your theories, but not your own facts, Scott.
Martha, these are things that you've talked about since
But we're here today talking about them, and I'm telling you you're wrong. And I'm telling you that I support tax policies, as I've said, consistently for the middle class. So let's talk about what the real differences are.
Okay. I think we'll probably get to more and more of that as we go on. Let's go to another issue, which is certainly going to take us a few minutes. health care. It appears now there will be some sort of final vote sometime in mid-February, perhaps sooner. Our new senator will be voting on that. There appears to be no question about that on the health care reform. We don't know yet what's going to be in the final plan. Let me ask you, and this will go first to Ms. Coakley, what needs to be in there? What will you not vote for if it's in there? What do you need to see in the final health care package to give it your vote, briefly?
I've said I support what the Senate proposal is. I don't love some of it, but I think that in general it provides for the two goals we need in health care, which is to get people covered, which we've done already in Massachusetts. I know Scott agrees with that. And that we need to address the costs, which we haven't done yet in Massachusetts, but we have some ways to do that in looking at administrative costs, the way we do reimbursements, the way we pay global settlements, for instance. And the thing that everybody has to remember is this. We cannot afford the status quo in health care. The costs are rising 8 to 10% every year. It's unsustainable at the government level, at the private sector level, at the not-for-profit level. And so I think we need more transparency and competition. I've said that throughout this race. I don't think the bill gets there yet, but I think it lays a very good platform to say, let's move forward in a way that's consistent with what Massachusetts needs and where we go to keep costs down in the country. And I will say that for the last 3 years, as head of not-for-profits, starting a healthcare division, I've worked really closely with what's happening in Massachusetts. I know what some of the mistakes are that we've made, and I know where we need to go to get costs down. And if we don't do that, people now are not going to be able to get the kind of health care choices and the health care that they want.
Mr. Brown, you've said you're against what you've seen so far. Is that the way you see it coming out? No chance of your voting for
Well, yes,
reform?
yes, and thanks for the question. The health care plan is not good for Bay State Health Center here in this area, and as well as for Massachusetts. I worked on the health care bill. I helped write it. I have played a role in it. It was passed unanimously in a bipartisan manner, including with Senator Kennedy. And the problem with it is that we already have 98% of our people insured. And we also knew and have known that we need to look at pricing because it is getting a little bit out of control. But if you look at the national plan, they're taking $500 billion from Medicare. If you're a veteran, they're looking at affecting your TRICARE coverage as well. And if you look at the longer lines, lesser care, and we're already doing it here, why would we in fact go and subsidize the other states for their failure to do what we've already done? It makes no sense to me. So not only will we be paying for our plan, we're going to then be paying for a national plan for 4 years, not going to get any benefits. And you look at the backroom deal with Nebraska and Louisiana, it's broken. It's really to the point now where there's no faith throughout anybody in the country on this particular bill. I would vote against it to bring it back because I do believe that everybody's entitled to health care coverage. We've done it here, and I would be happy to go down there and tell them how we did it and then learn from other states if they'd like to come forth and bring ideas to create their own plan in favor of government incentives to help stimulate that. But why do we need a one-size-fits-all government approach, 16% of the industry, trillions of extra dollars, and we already did it? It makes no sense.
Mr. Kennedy.
No, we already did it. We did it very poorly. Let's be honest here. We pay more or higher premiums than any other state per person, and our premiums are going up faster. We didn't address the cost. Now let's take a look at the healthcare industry in general. What's the one area of healthcare that year after year goes down in price? It's elective surgery. And the interesting thing is a lot of people say, well, that's elective surgery. But if you take a look, there are a number of things that happen in regular surgery that happen in elective surgery. For example, anesthesia. So anesthesia in general during elective surgery is much cheaper than it is if you go via a healthcare provider. Why is that? It is because of insurance companies. It is because of the regulations that we have in place. Today, 57% of all medical spending is done by the government in some way, shape, or form. And that is why prices keep going up. There's an antitrust exemption that is in place that allows insurance companies not to compete with each other. And that is why prices go up. We all know that if you've got two gas stations across the street from each other, one with a lower price, the prices will eventually go down between those two because they have to compete. We didn't do it in Massachusetts, which is something that Scott put in place. We're not going to do it in Washington, which is something that Martha is advocating, and we have to address that first. For it to be something that people can access or have access to, we have to make it affordable.